Hello, everyone. Susan Hopkins here. I'm with Stuart Shanker, as always, and welcome to the Self-Reg show. We've got a really interesting topic today. We're going to expand on what we talked about last time and explore the inner brain. Stuart, how are you?
I am good. I'm in holiday spirit.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned holidays, as everyone who's watching this in video format on our YouTube channel, on the MEHRIT Centre's YouTube channel, will see. I have my holiday bling behind me, and so you're watching this. It's probably not the holidays. This is being released in January, but it really ties in with what we're talking about today. Stuart, and I wanted to tell you a story just to get us started about my Aunt Sharon. And you know a little bit about her. Not a lot, though, because I haven't told you that many stories and of how important she was in my life. She passed away in 2009. And this is a picture of her, and it's on the front of a cookbook. And I always think about her because she was just such an important, my mom's sister, such an important part of my life. But the reason that I have this cookbook out is at the MEHRIT Centre. We were doing, we have such an amazing team, as you well know. And one of the things we're doing this year is just sharing recipes. And so I thought, well, I would share one of my mom's recipes. And then I found this book that my cousin Shell put together, and it was the recipes of my Aunt Sharon, and she put it away when Aunt Sharon passed away. And it's amazing when I look at it, because there's a letter in the very front that she wrote to her mom, my grandmother, who I never met, and her writing looks just like my mom. And I found a recipe in there called Dots. Brown Betty, apple brown Betty, and it was just really, it was this moment. I've looked at this before, but I haven't, I just dug it out and found it recently. And I can't stop thinking of my Aunt Sharon. And if you can see right behind me on the ledge, those of you that are watching on, listening to this, I'm pointing to a mantle above my fireplace, and it's a two little people. I guess it's Santa and Mrs. Claus. And look, we celebrate Christmas in my home. Whatever it is you celebrate at this time of year, we honor that. This is just what I celebrate, and it. My Aunt Sharon made those years ago, and they're my favorite. My favorite holiday thing is to take them out and think of my Aunt Sharon. And so I really was just have her on my mind today, and because there was something unique about her and my relationships. My early years weren't the easiest. There was some really good stuff. I had lots of love from my mom, but my mom was also struggling with her own stuff. And somehow my Aunt Sharon just seemed to sort of fill a void that I really needed around family, especially when I became a young adult. She, when I was trying to understand everything, trying to feel connected to others, had a smaller family. My dad's family was all American, and it was my Aunt Sharon. And like, it didn't matter where I was, what I needed, I could call her, and she was always, always, always there for me. And there was just something unique about her that when you were in a room with Aunt Sharon, so I was very proud she was my aunt, but everybody felt that way. Everybody felt connected to her. My mom, I can still see the two of them giggling on the couch. There'd be a little bit bad, and there's just joy and laughter. And, she struggled with her own stuff too, right? And yet there was just something about my Aunt Sharon's ability to connect and make she always made me feel welcome, safe, loved, cared about, and it just seemed like a really nice. There's so many stories I could tell you about her, like you just wouldn't believe the stories. But I just thought I'd start by telling you about this really special human in my life. And as we think about the inner brain, I know we're going to talk about infants and moms, but the inner brain is a lot more than just infants and moms, So that's my Aunt Sharon. I wish you could have met her. She would have loved you, Stuart, and you would have loved her. And so that's just a little bit about her. Where do you want to take us? Do you want to ask me, know anything more about Aunt Sharon, or do you just want to dive right in? And I'll be listening and see if I can link that to anything that's in my heart right now.
It's a really nice story. And it really speaks to the essence of the interbrain. We talk about the interbrain as this extraordinary phenomenon um, that enabled us to give birth to our babies prematurely. And so we talked about this in our last episode, how we have this brain to brain hookup, um, which allows us to feel, to actually feel what each other is saying. And the reason why Susan's told the story is to make the point that this interbrain is not simply about mothers and babies. It's about teenagers and an aunt. It's about two sisters on a couch. And the last thing that Susan said, it's about anyone who met Aunt Sharon or who has an Aunt Sharon in their life, who produces something which is neurobiologically very interesting. And so I'm guessing that you told the story because that's what you wanted to talk about today. Am I right?
Oh, well. Well, I never know where you're going to lead us. It's just I always try to think about what's a story that might link to at least the theme of the day.
So I don't know how much neurobiology Susan's going to let me delve into today. But there's something really interesting that's going on here. And one of the things I love about Self-Reg is that this is a dynamic theory. And what I mean by that is that, Susan always explains how Self-Reg is grounded in science, not just in neuroscience, but also in physiology and biology. And if there's one thing we can say about science, it is that it never rests, or at least that scientists never rest. So Self-Reg is constantly growing as these sciences advance. And boy, have we ever seen some interesting advances over the last couple of years. And um, we're in a really fortunate position because these advances really fit perfectly with the Self-Reg framework. And so I thought what we talk about today is just dive a little deeper uh, on the basis of the things we've learned over the last few years. And I'm going to introduce an important reframing. And the reframing is that the interbrain isn't just this wireless connection between a mother's brain and a baby's brain, or between a young teenager and her aunt's brain. Um, it's a neurobiological connection. In fact, it's a self-regulating connection. And I'm going to try to explain that now. Okay, so what have we learned? We've learned that the baby is absolutely bathed in stress. Uh, the stress of light, the stress of sound, the stress of physical discomfort, the stress of gravity. All of these are stresses. And remember that the scientific definition of stress is anything that requires us to burn energy in order to stay in homeostasis. Well, how does that happen? I'll give you the short version for the podcast, and we'll do a longer version for the Shanker Chronicles. But essentially, what happens is because stress, threat, and remember that everything, all the things I just described, means that we're constantly burning energy. It raises a really interesting question. Where does the energy come from? Obviously, it comes from within us, and it's glucose. But how do we tap into it? And the answer is that inside the hypothalamus, which is a tiny little system just between the midbrain and the forebrain. For all intents and purposes, it's a gray brain system in the diencephalon. So inside this tiny little system, there's an even tinier little system, a tiny little nucleus, a group of neurons. And when there's a stress, it activates these neurons, and they release a neurochemical called corticotropin releasing factor. And what that does is it sets in motion a wave of neurochemical transformations that results in the release of cortisol. Everybody's heard of cortisol, and the primary function is to tap into the energy reserves that are located in our fat cells and convert them into usable energy so we can deal with the stress. But that raises a really intriguing problem. And the intriguing problem is if we're bathed in stress, if all these things I just mentioned, that's just a start. There's so much written today about how, we're so overstressed, but really what people are talking about is the stress of money, finances, or the stress of all the things you have to do. But stress starts the moment we're born. In fact, there's stresses before. And the stresses are physical stresses. So with all this stress that we're constantly that are constantly bombarding us, how do we ever get into homeostasis? How do we avoid burning out? How do we avoid what's called cortilosemia, which we know impairs brain development in baby? And the answer is a really, really interesting one. Commingled with these neurons, these corticotropin releasing factor neurons in the periventricular nucleus, are oxytocin neurons. So everybody's heard of oxytocin, and I think you probably all heard of oxytocin. We call it the cuddle chemical. It's the neurohormone that we associate with bonding, with breastfeeding, with social interaction, warm social interaction. But in fact, it has a more primitive function that we inherited from mammals, who in turn inherited this and from reptiles. I can't remember what the title of the Shanker Chronicle is going to be for this. I'm hoping it's going to be Triune 2.0. That's what we're really studying when we look at the triune brain. We're looking at something called exaptation. So if that intrigues you, you're going to have to look into the Shanker Chronicle on this. So
I'm going to pause you for 1 second, Stuart, because I just want to interject and tell everybody, I know you love listening to Stuart. Do not feel overwhelmed by all the words. I go to I always joke about Stuart sending me to Google constantly. And it doesn't matter how many times I go to Google, there's something new to go and learn. There are tons of ways to learn more. If you really like the science, there are courses. The chronicles are webinars, but there's also going to be a book. There's going to be books and ways to learn more about it. The key here is staying with the story for me, from a podcast perspective, is really there's a story here. Stuart gave you a little aha that he was going to say something new, and he did. For self-reggers out there, it's the first time I've heard him describe the interbrain beyond just Digby Tanton's idea of a Bluetooth. He's talking about something much more, he's talking about something way more, involves the whole brain and body. This science is really important, and I know some of you are just gobbling it all up. The key is stay with the story. And that's where we're going to tap in just a few minutes. So keep going, Stuart. I'm staying with the story.
okay, so we've got all these neurons that are burning up all our energy. What turns them off? What stops them so that we don't burn out? And the answer is oxytocin. So what oxytocin does is, in this tiny little part of the brain, mixed in with all the neurons that burn energy, are neurons that stop them from burning energy. Okay, so this raises a really intriguing question. We know what turns on the energy burning ones. Stress. That's what stress does. Turns on, makes us, it's like turning up the thermostat on the on your furnace, and you start to burn fuel. What turns it off? What triggers the oxytocin? And the answer, which is really quite incredible, is we do. We trigger the oxytocin. If I leave a baby all alone, they're going to burn way too much. They're going to get sick. Their growth's going to be impaired. They're going to have problems later in life. But if I cuddle my baby, if I stroke my baby, if I sing a lullaby to my baby, what I'm doing is I'm triggering the oxytocin. I am turning off the energy burners, turning off the furnace. Now, the point of Susan's story is really fascinating, because it turns out that not only did nature design us to turn off my baby's energy burning, so that my baby can grow and have a healthy immune system, have great brain development. And I do it just by stroking her and cuddling her and singing to her. But the point of Susan's story is that her aunt did the same for her when she was a teenager. The two sisters did the same for each other when they were adults. All through our life, we are the ones that turn off the energy burners in someone else. But, and there's a big but. And the but is, okay, so what we're doing is we're giving the neurobiology of relationships, the neurobiology of co-regulation. This is a way of regulating how much energy the other person burns. But there is a but. And the but is, I can only do this if I'm calm. I can only do this if I myself am in this state where I can stroke gently, vocalize gently. Everybody, I hope, has an Aunt Sharon in their lives. And I'm guessing that everybody's also got an Uncle Bob in their lives. And Uncle Bob is the opposite of Aunt Sharon. When I had my Uncle Bob, and I won't give his real name, I would hide. My sister and I would hide when we knew he was coming. And the weird part is, he would try to be a nice uncle, and he always made us feel worse. Everything was off. And the reason was, he knew he had like a script. He was going to be the good uncle. But regardless of what he said it too hard. We could feel his anxiety or his irritation. And he was irritated with little kids, and that's why we ran and hid. Didn't matter what he said. And so we come back to the very fundamental point of the interbrain. It's about feeling. Our brain-to-brain hookup is about feeling what the other person's feeling. If that person is feeling joy, is feeling calm, it turns off my stress burners. If that person is feeling irritation or anxiety or fear, it turns on my energy burners. So, the long and the short of all this is we were designed to need each other. We were designed to regulate each other from the moment of birth until the moment of death. But self-reg always puts the emphasis on self. I have to be in a certain state in order to have this beneficial effect. I have to be aware of what I am feeling, why I am feeling overstressed. Now, in the Chronicles, we're going to explain that what this is really about is something even deeper in the brain, something that excessive stress causes. It's not the stress itself, it's something else. But for today's podcast, what matters is, I'm thinking about this as we head into Christmas here. We're taping this just a few days before Christmas. And what I'm thinking is, I know my kids are going to be overstressed. They're bringing their partners and they're going to be overstressed. I have a feeling they're bringing friends, so I'm going to be overstressed.
Yeah, I get it.
But what I have to do is, I also know, and I'm really certain about this, they're going to be turning to me as their Aunt Sharon. They're going to need this from me, even if they can't put it into words. And so to give them what they most need for Christmas, and what they most need is not another present. What they most need is that get together where they feel what Susan described. And for me to play this role of the paterfamilias, I'm going to have to meditate, I think, nonstop for the next 2 days.
What's so interesting is when you think about being overstressed at Christmas. If you were having questions about that, go back and find our podcast. We'll point it to you here on where we looked at the 5 domains, and the one before that, even where we looked at what stress is. Because remember, even something that seems really exciting and positive, I mean, that's a stressor in all kinds of domains, but in the emotion domain, that excitement and things
Yes.
as well. Just think about any birthday party that went south. We talk more about that in another podcast, right? But it's interesting to me, Stuart, as I hear you speak, and I want to, this is so hopeful, folks, because this is not another should. Oh, now I need to be calm, because guess what? You cannot decide to be calm. And it's okay to say, okay, what, and making sure we really understand what we mean by that. It's not just a few deep breaths. That might be a little strategy that works for some of the people some of the time. This is actually in a state where you're able to consciously be aware of being that tree, that solid anchor, the base that's, able to kind of go with the flow and having this influence on all those around. And we can't always do it. And that's okay. You've got to notice that and recognize you're human, just like me. Trust me, I don't always get it right, but I get it more right than I used to, thanks to self-reg and the ability to have that self-awareness. So it's really important to think about that. This message that Stuart's saying about it's not all just a brain to brain. It is going on beneath conscious awareness. Yes, we can still work on things. Yes, we can actually intentionally do things. For sure, that's what self-reg is all about. But we can't just decide to be calm because it doesn't work, or to connect like Uncle Bob did, or even like Aunt Sharon. Aunt Sharon didn't sit down and say, I'm going to have a connection with all the nieces and nephews felt that way about her. She was everybody's favorite aunt, right? But it wasn't like that. It was within her, right? So that's a really important point. It's a physiological state. This isn't another list thing to put on your list. It's really realizing that there's an awful lot more to it. So we've got to be working on the right things. Do you want to say anything more before I bring up a question for you, Stuart?
Yep. So what Susan's describing is, if you look at self-reg, you'll find the 5 steps of self-reg. And step number 4 is the step at which we can become where we are having the same kind of effect that Aunt Sharon was having. But look carefully at self-reg. You can't, what Susan's saying is you can't will yourself to be in step 4. You can't decide I'm going to be in step 4. Self-reg is a pathway to getting to step 4. You have to go through the first 3 steps in order to achieve that state of calm, listening, embodied awareness, and reflective. And Susan made another point that I'll draw attention to. This isn't something that you can say, well, it's going to be Christmas dinner in about 2 hours. I better hurry up and do steps 1 to 4. So this has to
Yeah.
become a daily practice. And what happens is it becomes automatic. And with Aunt Sharon, it was not only automatic. If you listen carefully to the story, it had been automatic for an awful long time. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
the okay. So that's our Christmas gift. What our Christmas gift is, we're giving you the pathway to being in that state where you can turn off not just your own, but everyone else's energy burning stress response.
And so, I just before I'm just going to ask one thing right at the end, Stuart, that I think is really important for people. But first, I want to know something. I already know the answer to this, so I'm not. But I think it's important for
Yes.
those new. But I know it, but I think there's people out there that maybe have never heard you say this and might be listening, and to all of this, and even about you being the that co-regulator for your kids. Me with a teenager now, that's why I laughed out loud when you said about the friends and everything. Do you always get this right, Stuart? Are you expecting this holiday to be just smooth, and Stuart's going to be the ever calm in homeostasis, you know. I, I'm laughing, but I think some people they like to hear that we're human. It helps. It helps also frame. It's not just making this accessible and making it real. It's also really understanding that it's what Stuart just said. It's not a one-off. It's not something you just do and it solves everything. It's a way of being, and it's a life, and it's something we're always working on, and we're going in the right direction when we have self-reg in our heart, in our minds. We know some of the science, and we're building some of those skills as well. So anything you want to say about that to keep it real? If not, I have something.
Okay, so short answer is no. I was thinking when you asked that, I was remembering my kids were really young. They were about 5 and 2, and we had done so much work trying to get them they were little 6 and 3, trying to get them the presents that they had unknowingly asked for, and within a remarkably short time, like within an hour of opening presents, all hell had broken out in the house. And I was shouting, and my wife was shouting. And so finally, I don't know at what point, but finally at some stage, I realized that I was shouting. So it had all happened without my being aware that I was in red brain. Um,
Yeah.
but I was already doing self-reg, so I thought, man, I'm the one who needs a bit of a timeout here. So
Yeah.
I went off and I made myself a coffee and began to think. It's actually the reason why I started looking at stress inventories. What were the stresses here? But the stresses on my kids. All right. So Susan's explained that the stress of excitement, the stress of disappointment, whatever, um, were different from the stresses on me. And
Mhm.
what were my stresses? And it would take us another show just to go through them all. But certainly, I had an expectation, and I was so upset to see, I love the expression Susan used right at the start, going south. I was so upset to see it going south. And it sent me into red brain. So look, um, Susan just said this perfectly. We're all going to have those moments. That's part of being human. And really, what we want to learn is how to recognize that I was in a moment. And all it took at that point was to come back into the room, smile, calm everything down, and say, I'm sorry. It's not,
Yeah.
but you can't do it. You can't do it while you're in red brain. When you're in red brain, you're out of control. It's just getting worse and worse and worse.
And you catch yourself and you get better and better at catching
You,
yourself and you
you
get it
get it.
more and more right. And the other thing you do is as over time, you begin
Yes,
skipping the need to actually reframe because it's
yes,
when Stuart says you just kind of know
yes.
and you get right to which are the stressors and what do I need to do and that's and it really does come along and with some humor, right? And if you're sitting at a holiday table of any time of year and your Aunt Sharon and your Uncle Bob and your kids and their partners and their friend, and their friends, and you're catching yourself not your best self or whatever. It's just okay. Right? When you catch yourself,
You're absolutely
and yeah, yeah, and it's very freeing. Self-Reg has one of the biggest stressors that Self-Reg has gifted me, and Stuart has gifted me, is a bit more freedom and the
yeah,
ability to know to work on. Like I've always been wanting to work on the right things, and I was working on the shoulds, coulds, and I got some of them until I didn't. Now I'm working on the right things, and thanks to Stuart, the science, and it's three steps forward, one back, two back. And sometimes you're like, ah, but it comes. And this sense of freedom is lovely because I'm kinder to myself. I last night was not a great night in this house, right? So it wasn't awful, but it wasn't great. And, I'm not harping on that. What I'm doing, is now I'm like, okay, I definitely need, a better sleep tonight. I need to do certain things today. And like that's where my mind is on the things that can make a difference. And that's where we got to get more science into this practice of teaching, of parenting, of leading. We think we have a lot of it in there. And there are huge gaps because there's just, we have these ideas of how it's supposed to be done. And they're out of date. They're out of date in a very hopeful way, right? And it might have been science for that
great,
before, but the
great.
only thing that replaces science, is better science, and there's better science, and it's hopeful and it's freeing. And we wish you all well. Have a look at your interbrain. Think about one relationship or one connection or one moment where you would like to begin to hone that a little bit, and maybe it's just noticing what's happening in your yeah, you can feel your heart rate. I use that sometimes as feel it start to raise, or your voice, or or your tension, or your shoulders, or whatever, you're the finger coming out, right? Just begin to become a little bit more aware of it, and even just that without doing anything else, and the next steps about how to really make those connections like an Aunt Sharon did instantly. Just that awareness of that, are we online, not just the Bluetooth, is there that synchrony between us? Is there, are we feeling that with this person that really matters to me right now? And if not, just notice that can often be something that unsticks and begins to move it forward. So final word is yours, Stuart. And by the way, everyone, please, I will be Adam, our producer and director, will be on me if I don't mention to please share this podcast. Check out our website, self-reg.ca. You can see all kinds of past podcasts. You can sign up for webinars. You can find the chronicles. You can find books. You can find facilitated courses that you can get certificates and learn a lot more. And we'd love to hear from you. So please share, add your comments, reach out, and thank you so much. So final word is yours, Stuart.
Okay, I have to tell you that everything you just explained now, I felt my own stress coming down. I felt my own, like, I just felt this weight being lifted off of me. And I kind of hope that everybody who has joined us for this podcast today felt the same thing. So that's the gift that Susan gave, not just me, but I hope all of you as well.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time.